All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first session League Policy Committee meeting. I'm Mayor Walker from Draper. Good to see all of you. I would like to get us going as soon as we can. We have a lot of things to talk about today. And the first item of business we need to take care of is somebody make a motion to approve our January 8th, 2024 meeting minutes. All right, motion by Mayor Silvestrini. Is there a second? All right, second. All right. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Are there any opposed? Also, those are approved unanimously. All right, now I'm going to turn the time over to the team to get you going.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Welcome, everybody. So hands up really quick. Who's at their first LPC meeting? Got a few new faces. Welcome. Glad to have you here. For those of you that are back, condolences that we're doing this. So first week of the session, a lot is going on. We have a lot to get through. One of the things I just want to talk about at the very, very top is we're tracking over 130 bills so far. We've got a lot going on. There are over 550 bills drafted so far that are out there publicly. And a lot of those bills are being worked on. There's amendments coming out on bills. There are things being talked about. We're still working through fiscal implications. So I just don't want anybody to be shocked if our answer is either we don't know or that's in negotiations or that's being worked on. There's a lot going on with that. When we get to the end of the meeting, we'll have you ratify the bill positions. There's about a third of the bills on there that just do not have a position at all. Not even position pending. It's just empty. We spent a lot of the weekend going through those. We got through about 2/3 of the bills, but we haven't got through all of them yet. But again, we're still working through a lot. So don't be shocked if there's just some holes. There will be holes until the very end, but they will get smaller and more clarified. So things we're going to talk about today. Talk about infrastructure funding. Representative Dunnigan is going to be here in the meeting. He'll be here to answer some of the questions about the infrastructure funding districts. So get ready for those. I know you're shocked. Housing and land use, homelessness, transportation, retirement, and other topics, and we're going to ratify positions. Just a few reminders here. Make sure you're signed up for the daily updates of Friday Facts. If you're not, we're sending those out every night. Make sure you have your legislators' contact information. If you don't have that, we have a widget on our website that does that as well, and you can always reach out. We can help you. And as a reminder, we're here every Monday except the week of President's Day when we'll be here on Tuesday. So there's our quick session logistics. Molly, do you want to come hit this slide?
So a quick update for you all on the appropriations that we're tracking this year. The League Board of Directors voted to support the UEOC and governor's budget requests surrounding housing and homelessness. We anticipate the request in total for all these programs is about 150 million for housing, 190 million for homelessness, with a mix of one-time and ongoing funding. The Social Services Appropriations Committee heard these items last Friday. I was there and able to testify in support. One in particular that we are really prioritizing is the Shelter City Mitigation Fund. Last year, locals increased their contribution to the fund. The state did a one-time appropriation to match that. We're looking to make sure that that is an ongoing state support, so an additional $2.5 million ongoing.
All right, we're going to wait until Representative Dunnigan gets here to talk about infrastructure districts. So we're going to talk about a couple of other bills. First one, this one, SB 86, local government bond amendments. What this bill does, it prohibits local governments from issuing lease revenue bonds, so not all bonds, but specifically lease revenue bonds, unless the bond is issued to pay for correctional facility construction. The total amount of the bond is less than 10 million for local governments, or the total amount is less than 30 million for school districts. So we oppose this bill. We're not in favor of this bill. We had a meeting with him last week. If someone doesn't oppose the bill, let me know. But so far, we are not even a little bit in favor of this bill. We had a meeting with several stakeholders and Senator Fillmore last week. The fact pattern that is driving this is there were some entities, mostly school districts, that took a GO bond to the ballot. It failed on the ballot, and the entity turned around and did a lease revenue bond instead. Now, we've pointed out that the lease revenue bond doesn't necessarily raise taxes. It didn't necessarily change anything. That's a valid thing to do. But he didn't like the idea of people taking something to the ballot, the voters saying no, even though, yes, there are different reasons they could have voted no. May have nothing to do with the project. Maybe they're just voting no because they don't want to raise taxes. And then the entity going basically and doing it anyway. That is his fact pattern. Now, this is not likely to be the language we see for much longer. So after the meeting, there were a lot of ideas thrown out there, a lot of things brought up. There is most certainly going to be another substitute. I'm not saying we're going to like the next substitute any more than we like this one, but he has said that he is going to have another substitute. So really want to put this one on your radar, make you aware of it, which is saying the same thing. That there are discussions about how those lease revenue bonds get issued for certain amounts. So happy to take any questions on this one, but really just want to put it on everybody's radar that this is potentially a very big deal, depending how it goes. So any questions or thoughts on this one? Yeah, Gary. Liam's got the mic for you there.
A question about the fact pattern, if I may, and maybe you don't know, but did the entity that issued the lease revenue bonds issue the bonds for the same amount and the exact same project, or was it modified?
That's a great question. It was the same project. I don't know whether or not it was the exact same amount or not. From our understanding, though, they didn't raise any taxes when they did it. They dealt with it in the existing budget.
I mean, frequently when that happens, because it is a different revenue source, it's not dedicated, you will see an entity that will go ahead and bond, but they will change the scope of the project because they do not have the dedicated revenue source. And that's, I think, an important consideration in this conversation.
So, and that's a good point. One of the issues was brought up, and this I think happens with the school district perhaps more than with city, but they said, say you went to a GO bond for 3 schools in the school district, and all 3 of those schools are good and we need those, but one of them is an emergency. There is just no more space for that one. So they talked about some examples where, yeah, maybe you go for the one and you don't get all 3 schools, but you really need that one school right now. So yeah, you do change the scope of that. So that is a good point. And that is one of the things we discussed in there. All right, if no other thoughts, at this point, we are suggesting that we are opposed to this bill. When we see a substitute, we'll see if that changes our mind in any way, shape, or form, but we've let him know that we're definitely opposed to this at this point. All right. Oh, we're already housing land use, which we'll jump over. Knowing that if Representative Dunnigan comes in, we'll jump back to infrastructure district. So Cam, I'll let you take this maybe for just a minute to tee it up.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to the 2024 session. It's real now. My daughters have their paper chain on the wall, counting down each day until the session ends. So I have a picture on my phone. It didn't make it into the PowerPoint, so I'll add that for next week. Okay. Actually, this one's not mine. This is Carson, yours, House Bill 166. So I'll let you do this one first. Bye, everybody.
All right. So Senate Bill, so HB 166, not bill, I think I had that wrong. SB 66, I think was the bill number last year. This is similar. It was called micro schools. This is very similar to that bill, I think almost identical. So the intent of the bill sponsor is to classify micro schools, which are like private charter schools and home schools, and give them a legal classification, and then extend the permitted use status that charter schools have to these new entities. The difference is these entities must meet a lot more standards than charter schools do, and you maintain a lot more authority, but the bill sponsor wants to ensure as these come online that they have some kind of legal status within your planning codes. So last year, the LPC voted to get to neutral in exchange for the negotiations around health, safety, welfare, around the more stringent building requirements, and around the ability to maintain setbacks, height, massing, parking, business licensing, traffic regulations, parking, hours of operation. I think I said parking twice because that one's important. And other health, safety, welfare regulations. So for this reason, again, this is a small preemption. It's extending a small preemption to these new types of units. many of which, like homeschools, are probably already operating in your city. And this just creates classification for them. I want to clarify that this specifically excludes daycares. So there's been some questions about that in the past. There's been some other entities interested in doing that separate from this bill, but this specifically excludes daycares. For all those reasons, staff is recommending a neutral position like we arrived at last year. Yeah. Sorry to calling you while you have food, Kate. Liam, can you get a mic there?
Carson, what about liquor license proximity? So if these are popping up all over throughout your commercial centers, you know, that may be a limiting factor then, especially if it's a something that is going to X out other types of development for a very small group of students.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. That is an excellent question. So there is a provision in this bill that intends to address that and clarify that these do not meet the community location definition in code. I've heard from one city that they thought there was contradiction between that and the other provisions on community locations in state code. So the intent is to just say these don't apply there. So if you open up a new micro school downtown, it wouldn't affect liquor licensing. But I think I brought up to some of the stakeholders that there might need to be a little clarification, and they're open to that.
What are the parameters that determine a daycare? We have several in our city that actually has older students that attend daycare.
That's a good question. There are certain age requirements because it kind of taps into education code a little bit. So that's where I will get a little fuzzy on this, but the actual languages excludes daycares. And there are certain age groups, there are certain parameters that they have to meet for the other education requirements. But the intent is to exclude daycares. If we need to modify that language a little bit to address those large facilities, we can. Yeah, great question. Oh, and somebody online pointed out that the bill number wrong. It's actually SB 13. I just was looking at last year's bill when I was making the slide. So apologies for that. Senate Bill 13. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Again, this was worked on heavily last year by league staff and by, I want to give a shout out to, I don't see Dave Spatafor here, but the fire officials. Dave, thank you. Fire officials worked extensively, there you are, extensively on this bill to, there's a lot of specific requirements for building code. So fire officials got to a point that I think were comfortable with, or at least could live with. So that was an important piece. I won't get into the code changes, but just be aware that was some of the conversations as well. All right, well, if there's no other questions, feel free to follow up with me afterwards. If you have further questions or concerns, happy to talk more about it.
So currently in the process, so this bill 289 just adds consequential damages to if a case is taken to the property ombudsman and then later taken to court in district court, and the same position that was given by the property ombudsman is the same, and say a city loses both in the property ombudsman and in a later appeal, that the developer would be able to get consequential damages. As you can imagine, this is one that we would oppose. Any questions? Okay.
Okay, now it's my turn. House Bill 306. And before I reference the specifics here, I want to thank Cassidy. Where are you, Cassidy? In the back. Thank you, Cassidy. Cassidy joined our team a few months ago as our communications manager. And one of the first things she told me on her first day was how much She didn't like death by PowerPoint and accused us of doing that in every policy meeting. And she wasn't wrong. And it's still death by PowerPoint to a degree, but she's helped us try to rethink how to better organize the presentations here to get the information to you. So thank you for that, Cassidy. So you can see the staff recommendation and then quick things on this bill. I want to thank Bountiful, West Bountiful, and Centerville. I know that Bountiful's here. I know Centerville was here because of the hoodie. Oh yeah, there's the hoodie. That's right. And then West Bountiful, Dwayne, are you here? Are you online? Maybe Dwayne's online. But all three of the cities have met with Representative Ward since this bill came out last week. It's a very simple concept. The bill would apply to cities in first and second class counties. So counties of 185,000 residents or more, all the cities therein, regardless of city size, as well as to cities above 15,000 in third class counties. All cities in every residential area would have to allow 8 units to the acre for starter homes being defined as being subject to a 5-year deed restriction to require them to be owner occupied and initially be sold to a first-time home buyer. What's crossed out here is that the original version of the bill also would have preempted some impact fees. We have a copy of the substitute. I don't think the substitute's public yet, but we'll be taking, it just went public this morning, okay. In my conversations with Representative Ward, he acknowledged the infrastructure challenges if you preclude us from charging impact fees. So he was pulling that impact fee language out. So now it simply is a land use preemption around starter homes. So if this sounds familiar, it's because we've been warning you really for the last several LPC meetings that there were going to be bills in this space. And this is the first. It will not be the last. To Representative Ward's credit, we've had some good conversations with him, and his perspective is that by the state stepping in and allowing for small lot zoning in all residential areas, it will eventually over time lead to the development of more starter homes and thus help with the overall cost of housing. He also acknowledges that that we were going to oppose his bill, and I let him know this morning that that was still going to be the case. So our staff recommendation is to oppose. Again, at the end of the meeting, we'll take the ratifying vote. We're just trying to hit as many of these hot ticket ones as possible. So if people have questions or thoughts or want to disagree with the staff recommendation, you can speak now before we get to the ratifying vote. David South Weaver there.
Thank you. Is this in every residential
Yes.
zone?
Yes. Yep, it would apply everywhere, every residential zone in those communities. So it would not affect any community in Rich County or in San Juan County, but it would in first and second class counties, every city they're in, and then larger cities in third class counties. Okay. The modification's the impact fee piece for now. Yep, what's been, because I wasn't sure if it would be public in time for LPC, and I wanted to give him credit because, in part because of the pushback, he was taking that out in the sub. So the land use preemption is still there. You need to switch over, okay. I mentioned it's the first, likely not going to be the last. I would say at this point, today is business day 5 of the session, plus the 2 weekend days. So 7 total days of the session. And personally, I've had more meetings about housing related potential legislation than everything else combined, including over the weekends. So that's the first bill, not going to be the last bill. The House Bill 306 has not yet been assigned to a committee. So right now, we're opposed to it. If it ends up in a committee, then be prepared to push back on it hard. But I think at this point, the most important thing you can be doing is talking to your legislators in general about why it's so important that land use authority remains at the local level. Representative Ward's bill is a good starting point for that conversation, but don't just stop with a legislator saying, yeah, I won't vote for House Bill 306 because House Bill 306 isn't in a committee yet, okay? So with that being said, Mayor Silvestrini, hold on, Liam's coming.
I think it might be useful, Cam, to talk about some of our talking points about this. Maybe it isn't going to go anywhere, but But when you talk to your legislators, it's not just that we hated it, we want local control, but that this kind of mandate or zoning by right effectively would really affect our ability to provide quality for our residents. And I can imagine, 8 units on Bountiful Bench or in my community on, high on the mountainside where, it's really difficult to serve that kind of a development with utilities, period. And with emergency services, all kinds of reasons why that kind of defeats our planning abilities and they're just bad. It's just bad policy. It's going to create unintended consequences.
No, Mercer Strini, I appreciate you saying that because it's helpful for everybody to be on the same page about that, because those are the arguments that we made to Representative Ward. I know they're similar to the arguments that Bountiful, Centerville, and West Bountiful made as well. Interestingly, one of the arguments that came back, and just want people to be aware of this piece of it, is the argument that came back was, if you allow it everywhere by right, per his bill, you allow it everywhere, it's not going to pencil everywhere. So the market will be the limiting factor. And that is a part of the conversation we've heard a lot over the last few weeks here, is kind of this push and pull between, should local governments be leading out on the planning, or should the market basically be leading out on land use planning? And really the ideal outcome is when the two are in sync, right? Where we're planning well and the market's responding and we're able to pay for pipes and you're able to get units built at an affordable price point. Like that's the outcome.
Thank you, Cam. Brett Wright, Eagle Mountain City Council member. One of the concerns that I have specifically for our community is just the vastness of the land that's undeveloped in our area. And when you look at 75% of the land mass in our 52 square miles is undeveloped currently, this type of legislation will crush any planning that has taken place or that might take place in our valley. And I think that's really important. There's also some other components to this. The median sales price, literally, as I read what's proposed, the developer could sell the house for $1 less than the median price. Then it's locked into a single family homeowner for a period of 5 years. There's nothing that controls what happens to it after that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, for 5 years, it has to be held by single family homeowner. But the reality of it is there's nothing that stipulates what happens when the first homeowner sells it. Does he sell it at market rate and capitalize on that? I mean, there's just so many things missing in this.
Well, one of the tricky things with any sort of deed restriction, and Councilmember, I'm glad you brought those points up. Anytime a deed restriction expires, whoever the last holder is of that deed restriction can experience a windfall. There are trade-offs with deed restrictions because deed restrictions also provide a very valuable service because it does keep a unit affordable for a period of time. So the whole policy around deed restrictions is a really complex one. To your point about a fast-growing community with a lot of open space, you're not alone in sharing that concern. Normally Saratoga Springs is sitting in the front row and they would share that concern. Oh, and I know I saw you. Oh, you okay? So there you go. He went from the front row to the back. But we've heard those same concerns from Lehigh. We've heard those same concerns from Saratoga. We've heard those same concerns from Southern Utah County, from Northwest Davis County, Western Weber County, and the cities therein. We've made that planning argument and the infrastructure argument. Those are arguments you need to keep making with your legislators, because the most important thing for legislators to understand is one size misfits all. And all of our communities are planning for housing and planning for growth. And do we have the right tools in order to achieve those outcomes? We're still having those conversations on a daily basis. And are there other tools that could help achieve those outcomes? But the governor is fond of saying, if density precedes infrastructure, you lose quality of life. If infrastructure precedes density, then you can preserve quality of life. So how do we ensure that when you're planning for a variety of housing types and planning for infrastructure, that those are going hand in hand?
Hey, Cam. So I have a comment on that comeback, and that is the market forces. The governor himself and likely other legislators have already indicated the failure of the market to provide for starter homes. So we're going to continue to let the market fail. Is that essentially what they're saying is let the market dictate, but the market has already failed in this particular aspect of it. So I don't believe that that's a valid argument, them coming back and saying, let's just let the market take care of it.
A good point, Norm. And I was mentioning Southern Utah County. So Santa Quinn, similar fact pattern as as Eagle Mountain. The counter argument is I want to be fair to Representative Ward. He spent an hour and a half with me and he spent time with the other cities. His argument and some of the arguments of the supporters of this bill have been that if there was certainty up front, that they knew they were going to get this zoning. So they had that certainty up front. They didn't have to go through a rezone petition, that in turn, they would be able to produce more units at that deed restricted price point.
Cam,
That's been their argument.
Cam, Mike Winder, Mill Creek City Manager. One of the great successes I thought of last session was was it Spanish Fork that had the illustrations to show on road width? And that was powerful. A lot of words are thrown around up here on Capitol Hill, but those pictures speak volumes. So I would say to this league staff and others, as you get into some of these land use bills, every legislator's address is out there publicly. Don't be afraid to put a little map together that would show how would this specific bill impact your neighborhood and the density and infill that could happen in your neighborhood. And I promise you it will be a powerful tool, just like the Spanish Fork illustrations were last year.
Perfect. That's spoken from a former legislator who knows what it's like to be on the other side of the door.
We don't read things, we like pictures.
Yeah, don't read. I'm not going to repeat that on the record, but okay. So again, this bill's out there. Our recommendation is oppose. If it starts moving, we'll do action alerts and the like. Right now, it has not yet been assigned to committee, and it's the first and won't be the last in the space. Last Wednesday, the league board went through, Mayor Kaufusi is fair to call it a very painful but productive exercise. Okay, she said she's had worse because she's been in office for a while. But we had a lengthy board meeting at the end of Local Officials Day where we were bringing concepts back to the board that we've heard up here at the Capitol and asking the board to give us general direction so we could get a sense of our sandbox. Because you take positions on bills, you ratify bill positions. What we're going to do here via Slido aren't bills yet, but they're all the different ideas that are being discussed because we need to get a sense from you of, are any of these potentially workable? So when we go back into these conversations, we know like, yes, we can proceed down this path under these circumstances, or no, we can't. So I always see some people reaching for their phones. And so, yes, it is Slido time. Mayor Walker, do you want to add anything before we switch to Slido?
As we look at Representative Ward's bill, the other question is, we had the ADUs that were supposed to do substantial reduction in the housing crisis, if you will. I don't know that they have, but do these entitled units, these 8 by right, do they have an ADU component that goes with them? Does it depend on the area of the city? That would be just the question.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. And it would be, if your city is designated 75%, and then this state overlay goes into place, then those IADUs would be allowed under state law in those 75%. You'd have 8 units plus 8 IADUs. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to walk through these. Now, before we open it up, just remember, like, we are word limited in Slido. So we can't put every detail on the screen. So my request is, before you answer it, let me explain it. If you have a question, ask the question, and then fill out the Slido. We've got 4 on housing. And then as you see, there's still a lot of other things to get to the agenda. Justin, did you mention what's in here at 1:30? Okay, yeah, so we're time sent. Okay, he says mention it again. We have to be out time sensitive today because at 2 o'clock, there's a committee hearing in here that they have to prepare for, and it's on the bathroom bill, which is going to have a full house. So Capital Preservation wants us out so they can turn the room, okay? All right. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. All right. Now, before you answer the question, here's the context. Representative Ward's bill would apply in all residential zones. In the last few days, there's been chatter about, rather than applying in all residential zones, what if there is a requirement to zone for small lots or townhomes in some percentage of your city? But for a builder to, hold on one second, for a builder to access that type of zoning, they would have to meet certain benchmarks, either small units or deed restricted units. So don't focus on the percentages right now, but just that concept of we would have to designate certain areas or certain zones. And then a property owner could qualify for that, be eligible for that if certain units were deed restricted to be owner occupied, first-time home buyers, et cetera, or they were required to be built as smaller units. Okay. Now, this question does not contemplate right now whether or not you have existing townhomes or small lots. The next question will. So this is trying to get to just the concept. Then the next question will get to varying degrees of credit based on what you've already zoned for. Okay. What? We also are not showing results right now. We will be sharing these results with the league officers later today in anticipation of our meeting with the governor's office tomorrow. There are 24 chats, but I assume that nobody's actually asking me a question in the chat room. Okay. Yeah, there's actually a lot of great questions in here. So a lot of folks just commenting on what these other concepts would mean for planning. Aaron Wells from Highland made a point that I think is fair to say to the whole group. Knowing there are other bills like this coming, is it okay for us to just oppose, or do we need to start thinking about a compromise if there is one? And I think those last 4 words are the key piece, if there is one. We just met, for full disclosure, we met prior to this meeting with the league officers. They actually helped us walk through the Slido questions of what to ask, because we are trying to figure out, like, is there a space that respects the role of local government, results in good planning, and could result in more, I almost used the term, but I didn't, more first homes that could help affordability? Is there a way to bring those pieces together? And I think as of January 22nd, it's too early to say no to all of that. That day may be coming, and may be coming quickly, but that's what we're trying to ascertain from the group. So Aaron, hope that answers your question. Okay. Next question, going once, going twice. Oh, that bar, got it. Okay, this gets to the quote unquote credit piece. If there was a first homes requirement, should it apply to a smaller percentage in cities who have entitled or existing small lots or townhome zoning than cities who don't? This is admittedly a very tricky conversation for a statewide organization that represents every city in the state, because by definition, one size fits all for state legislation. And by definition, every city is in a different space when it comes to infrastructure, life cycle, and everything else. Representative Dunnigan's here. Oh, hello, Representative Dunnigan. We are going to finish this Slido question, and then we'll just pause it there and come back to the other two, right? I want you right here next to me. And so we're going to leave this Slido question up. Let me just finish explaining this one, because this is actually dealing somewhat with Representative Ward's bill.
Okay.
But again, this is really getting to that point that some cities are built out. Some, like Eagle Mountain, have lots of space. Some have planned for units that have not yet been built. Others already have existing units that were built 50 years ago, but would fit in this category. And so it's helpful for us to get a sense. You'll notice the first response is for all, the second is for some. And this was because a couple of our fast growth cities had reached out to us in the last few days and said, hey, absolutely, built out cities should get some credit, but they shouldn't get a pass if this is where the legislature ends up going. So that's why we worded those answers accordingly. So with that being said, I'm going to leave this Slido question open for a few more seconds. And then we have 2 more housing Slido questions, but we're going to pause on those. And I'm going to turn over to Justin to introduce former Taylorsville City Council member, current state representative, Jim Dunnigan. Justin, you want to give a quick overview?
Yep, we have a slide we can jump back to.
It won't screw up the Slido. Okay, well, that's why Carson can do it.
Okay, well, thank you, Representative Dunnigan, for being here. We've been talking about the Infrastructure Financing Districts Bill, HB 13, for a while now. But Representative Dunnigan was good enough to come and answer any questions about the bill. So we'll jump back to it really quick. We'll just put it up on the board. Good. All right, so we've got it up on the board, but Representative Dunnigan will let you say anything you'd like to about the bill while you're running it and what we're looking to do.
So thank you. Brennan, I'll let you introduce yourself too, please.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brennan Brown. I work for a financial services company named D.A. Davidson. This bill was an effort that came out of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission that the governor had asked a small working group to work on some housing and transit issues. This bill, that's where this started, and that's how I got involved. I was asked to kind of help from an expert kind of witness, not expert witness, but just as a voice that would say, okay, whatever is put into statute, would it work in the markets in the real world? And so I've kind of added my voice from that perspective, and Representative Dunnigan asked me to join him today to answer any questions that may come up.
So thank you. Appreciate having some time with you. There's been a lot of discussion on this bill, and I feel like I can say on this bill, if it wasn't for the misinformation, we wouldn't have any information at all. It's unbelievable, the stuff that I get. But so that what this is we, as you know, we have a shortage of housing supply and housing stock in Utah. And one of the main reasons, I'll tell you what the reason is not, it's not that we don't have enough entitled building lots. There are thousands, there are tens of thousands. In one city that I went to recently, in this valley, they have 9,000 entitled building lots, okay? And it's all over the state. So the intent of this bill that came out of the governor's commission was to try to find a way to get the infrastructure started. Who has the money to put in the streets, roads, sidewalks, sewer, water tank if needed? So is the city going to bond for it? It's your choice. This taps into a $2 to $5 billion available capital nationwide that currently is Utah's only getting 1% of, and a favorable tax basis. So a developer, instead of paying 10 to 15% to go get a loan to put them in infrastructure, they can get one maybe 5 to 7%. So it's just the infrastructure, but the whole purpose of this is a more favorable financing to get the stuff out of the ground, to get the infrastructure in, so then the builder can go in and start building homes. It's simply a finance tool. Instead of going and paying 10 to 15%, a special district can be created if 100% of the voters and 100% of the property owners agree. They can create a special service district. How do the local governments factor in? You still establish the land use. The formation of the special district gives no land use authority to the district. You control the land use. You control the subdivision approval. You control the building permit process. The infrastructure still has to be built up to the codes and the requirements that you have for any other structure. And so the hope is that we can get more infrastructure completed and get lots that are build ready, and then the builders can build on it. So how's it financed? We already have assessment areas. Daybreak's been using the assessment area model for years on their huge development out there. We already have an assessment area model. We're just using that. We're saying the special district can do that very similar. So the way it works is a developer gets 100% approval of all the owners and all the voters. They go through a process with the county clerk, the lieutenant governor's office. They file to get approval for a special district. What can they do with that special district? They can go to the bond market and get tax favored financing for the bonds. The developer then goes and starts putting in the infrastructure. They build a road. When that road is built, they go and give Brennan the receipts, and his bond providers will reimburse the developer. They don't give them this big sum of money up front that you're worried about they're going to take off. It's upon completion of a project or part of the project, they say, we've done this work, they get reimbursed. And then the property is assessed a fee to pay for the bond principal and interest while the improvements are going on. Once they start building a home on it, at the time of occupancy, and somebody moves into that home and takes occupancy, that proportionate piece of the bond has to be retired. So that home's out of it, okay? So if there's a 100-lot subdivision, home number one owns 1/100th of the infrastructure costs, let's say. At the time of that closing and occupancy, that piece of the bond has to be retired. So that home is done. As you go along, eventually all the 100 homes are occupied, the bond's retired, the district dissolves. Now, in order to tap in, do you want to add? Go ahead, Brendan.
I'm not sure I have much to add. That was a really good overview. I would, the one thing that I would add is just the emphasis that, again, this bill is focused on capital, accessing capital, deploying capital, and getting lots on the ground. It has nothing to do with any of the powers that the city already has or the local municipality with land use, entitlement, the type of infrastructure that can be built, the standard that it can be built. All of that is unchanged with this. This is merely a tool to access cheaper capital and or more capital, right? I think right now what we're finding is that the lending markets are very, very challenging. So when you look across the state and say, hey, there's tens of thousands of entitled lots that are ready to go, the challenge is that there's no capital to go do it, or that it's too expensive to go do it. So they just sit idle. So we're trying to bring capital to get lots on the ground so that there's more supply in the market.
Thank you. So in order to tap into this muni bond tax favored financing, the district has to be given some type of sovereign power. And so what we've done in the bill is we've given them taxing authority. Remember, the bonds are repaid through an assessment, which we already have in law, Assessment Act. So we give them ability to tax with a maximum mill levy of 0.0004. That's the same as the mosquito abatement district, okay? That's low. And they cannot bond against that money, which means they can't get an advanced stream of it, and it can only be used for infrastructure. So why and where that would ever be assessed or levied, I don't know. But when the district ends, that goes away. There's no continuing taxing authority, but we have to do something in order to meet the requirements of the bond market. So, you know, we have an infrastructure bank. In some years, we put general fund money in it. And I guess the question is, would you rather that we put general fund money in it and pay for it with taxpayer dollars so the developer can tap into that and build the infrastructure? Or should we let the private sector do it? There's plenty of money out there. We just need to provide a vehicle so we get these billions of dollars to come in and throw in the infrastructure to get it out of the ground. I think that's what I want to say.
Open up for a couple questions.
No questions, I'm sorry.
Okay, no questions. But we're gonna do it anyway. All right, do we have any questions? One back there and then we'll go over here.
Just two questions. One is there a minimum acreage that they have to have in order to have one of these districts? Concern for us in our community is we have a lot of greenfield. So we don't want like 300 districts we're having to keep some sort of track of already. So that's the first question. Then I have a follow-up question if you want to answer them separately.
So minimum size, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, is there a minimum number of acreage that is there a minimum number of acreage that the developer would have to have under control?
No, there's not, but there's a minimum requirement of infrastructure, and that'd be $1 million.
Okay, all right.
This is not going to be a good fit for a 8 or 10 or whatever, okay?
Yeah, just want to make sure. And then the second one is our biggest concern is having it paid off as C of O rather than plat recordation. The concern with us is we're going to have a family sitting there ready to move in and our building inspector is trying to hold them up because this hasn't been resolved. So our concern would be, and we would really like this to be more plat recordation rather than C of O. because we feel that that's the better, if we're going to go this route, that's the better place to do it than
Okay.
C of O.
Thank you. That's a fair question, but let me try to throw this out there. When the developer goes to the city, this is going to be before closing. When the developer goes to the city to get the certificate of occupancy, that's going to be advanced. And that's when the developer needs to prove with the bond signed off that they've relinquished that. So that's going to be before closing. It's not going to be, you're not going to issue the certificate of occupancy right at closing. You'll have done that prior to that. And whether or not we did it at the permit process, it's going to be the same stuff. The developer's going to have to show that. So I know that the concern I've heard is, no, we go to closing, we don't know if it's really good. No, developer's got to go, prove to you, have it recorded on the title that piece of the bond's been paid off. That should be well before you go to closing. Want to add to that?
Yeah, one other thing I'd add is just that the challenge with doing it at plat is it's just a little too early. You don't really get the full impact of the financing because we're trying to put capital into the project, get it moving, and get towards lot sales and revenue events, which are really the thing that pay the bond back. And so if you separate those two by too big of a distance, it doesn't really achieve much. So you have to have the revenue event relatively close to when the bond is repaid so that you get the full impact of the financing.
One other thing I want to add is, let's say the finished value of the lot's $100,000 after all the improvements are put in. So the bill limits the amount of the infrastructure district financing to 1/3 of the finished value of the lot, of the estimated finished value. So the developer's going to have money in it. They're going to have skin in the game. These bonds are not going to be used to put all of the infrastructure, and the developer's going to have to come up with some of their own money to finance it. So there's a limit. 1/3 of the projected finished lot value is how much could be financed with these bonds.
Hi, Representative.
Hi.
First, I want to thank you because so much of the things that we talked about that made me so nervous, like you are addressing here and thank you. Like it's so much better than it was. My concern kind of aligns with what we were just talking about is the amount of risk that you are still asking municipalities to assume in the form of people coming to you and still saying, we're not doing our jobs. We're holding this up because of these bottlenecks. My concern, in addition to it looking like we're holding up certificates of occupancy, I'm living in a hellscape right now in the last rural residence in Salt Lake City. We have an out-of-state developer using an out-of-state construction company that is making my constituents' lives miserable. They are destroying existing infrastructure, and we have so little recourse. We're collaborating with the county, with departments of health, and we have so few tools. I'm not worried about our homegrown developers using this tool. In fact, let's get them as much low interest capital as possible to partner with us. I'm worried that with the advent of the Olympics, with MLB, with NHL, with all the nationwide and international attention we're getting, we've declared a gold rush on our state. And we can't trust the intentions of everyone coming or the quality of their work. So when I, as a municipality, assume a road that even I may have given design review to and all those things, when we get to the situation where we have subpar or ridiculously over par things that are going to require maintenance that we can't afford, I need to know that there's recourse that doesn't rely on me making my case to one legislator and trying to convince all of you. I would love to see consequences in this for people who would misuse this bill and subject our constituents and our municipal governments to extra duress, stress, work. I would like to see some consequences. If they get lower interest rates, we need a little more skin in the game from them in exchange for that. And they need to be held to a higher accountability standards and consequences that matter. We know developers can have deep pockets and can afford a fine. I want real consequences that matter for infractions or failures to follow through or whatever might be inadvertently enabled in a situation like this. But conceptually, thank you for all your work. Like I'm not enthusiastic about it, but I am not the opponent I once was.
My only question is, I would love to hear your suggestions. Okay. You blacklist. You guys are all way more well qualified to give input on what some of those consequences could be. So I think communicating that would be super helpful.
So, you know, after the bill passes and the session's over, I'd say let's get together and discuss that. So I'm open to suggestions, and I appreciate the meetings we've had and your input, and I've tried to listen. I just want to say this is a financing tool for the infrastructure. We're not talking about the structure, which is a whole different thing, okay? And whether or not they get the financing from this or from their own bank or from somewhere else, this is not determining the quality of the work. You know, and if you want to blacklist, help me figure out how to do that, okay? Because believe me, I want good actors. Just keep in mind, we're talking about just the infrastructure piece, okay? And it should be your inspectors, I hope, that are going out and making sure that the roads, just like you would for any project, okay? Okay, I can't speak for my colleagues, so.
We have time for a couple more questions. Let's try to get done by 1 o'clock here. if we can.
Sorry, just a quick question. Representative, thank you. Brennan, thank you. Obviously, there are needed financial tools for infrastructure. I don't think anyone would necessarily disagree with that. I know one of the difficulties that municipalities in particular have had with assessment areas is the foreclosure process, or the possibility that the debt isn't paid when it's anticipated to be paid. It would be interesting to, I guess, understand how this might differ from either a public infrastructure district or from a city's issued assessment area bond, where ultimately, if the payment isn't made to the bondholder has recourse. What would the recourse be in this particular case? Cities have had some difficulty in essence, getting infrastructure in place and then having to go back and potentially foreclose on their residents.
So yeah, good question. The recourse, I mean, the collateral is the land itself. So if there's not a payment made, then there would be recourse to the land through a judicial or non-judicial foreclosure. And so I actually think the better comparison is to any other land development loan from a commercial bank. Those are the same remedies available to them as well. That would be on a deed of trust foreclosure versus an assessment lien foreclosure. But the process, whether judicial or non-judicial foreclosure, would be the same. So the bondholders are required to initiate it. So it wouldn't fall on the city's back, or it wouldn't be their responsibility. Any proceeds left in the trustee account can only be used for public infrastructure. So there is some certainty, and maybe not absolute certainty, but there is some certainty that if there's unfinished infrastructure, to the extent there's funds remaining, those have to be used on finishing out infrastructure.
Representative Dunnigan, thank you. Gary Hill, Bountiful City. Really appreciate the work and thought that's gone into this over the iterations over the last couple of years. Two quick questions, I hope. The first is related to the bonds. Most municipal bonds have you can't prepay them before 10 years. This bill would say that the bonds have to be repaid when the assessments are paid. If all of those Cs of O were issued prior to 10 years, then but the bond can't be repaid for 10 years. That means the entity can't be dissolved either. What's the process in light of that?
So a bond can't be refinanced in 10 years.
Many of them have prepayment penalty. You can't prepay them in 10 years either.
That's very rare in the municipal market. And if you have those terms, we should talk. We shouldn't have any prepayment penalties on a municipal bond in today's market.
No, that's not true.
yeah, there's no 10-year call provision on these bonds. Which is also true of any assessment bond that we've ever issued, in the sense that you can always prepay the bond via an assessment. So if a homeowner, this is an irrelevant example because it will be prepaid before a homeowner's in the home. But in some assessment areas that already exist in the state, a homeowner may make an annual assessment payment. There is a principal amount assigned to that lot that can be prepaid at any point in time. And if it's prepaid, there's a mandatory redemption provision within the bond documents in the indenture that shows the waterfall of how that lot can be prepaid at any time. You can't force a resident to not pay off. And that same sort of statutory framework exists all over the country, where bondholders know and accept that a property owner can prepay the full assessment at any time, at which point it would be subject to mandatory redemption, and the bond could fully be paid off. So these bonds will, in many cases, last much less than 10 years.
So that's great. If the tool exists, that's perfect.
Can I just respond to that too? So that's actually a really good question. And we've done some work on that because we didn't want to get into this and find out, oh, it's a nice idea, but the bond market's not going to go for it. We've done fairly extensive work with Brennan and others who are active in the bond market. So because we know some of these are going to be very short, might be 3 years or what, or less. Okay. And the bond market folks have come back and said, but we need this and this and this. So best we can, we've addressed that.
Thank you. That's great if the tool exists. Second question, and it's related to the governing board. The partnership between the entity that's ultimately going to have to maintain this infrastructure like we've talked about, and the construction is really important. Would you be willing to allow a member of the governing body that ultimately will accept the infrastructure to be appointed to that board, just a single seat?
So we've had some discussion about that, but I just invite you to ask yourselves, but I served 6 years on the city council. I'm a local government guy. Last session, I had this bill drafted. I was strongly encouraged to just cram it through. I pulled it back and said, no, I want to get it better. We'll have more discussion. But kind of why would you want that? Why do you want that connection? Why do you want that liability? We're trying to keep you separate. And so that you don't have, so somebody can't say, well, we had a member of the city council on it, so now let's go after their pockets as well. No, go after the bond issuer and let them fight the battle for you.
Well, I don't think that would be one. I don't think there would be any liability to a member of the board if they're acting within the bounds of their office, right? I think the question here is that it ensures the connection between the entity, taxing entity, mind you, right, that's putting in the infrastructure, and the taxing entity that's going to ultimately own it. A single seat doesn't do anything to override the will of the board, but I think it does ensure a level of communication. So
Okay,
that's the
I
thought.
appreciate that. I have talked to some city officials and they said, we don't want a connection with it, because even if we don't have a legal liability, we don't want somebody trying to make a case that we do have a legal liability. But I understand what you're saying. It's a fair point. Well, I will think about it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're about time. Any final really burning question? One more.
Hi, Monica Zoltansky, Sandy Mayor. A representative, where is the affordability component in this? If there's access to public funds or the bond market for developers, cities are being tasked with creating affordable housing. New development, it seems like an ideal fit to tie some set aside, some deed restrictions, some component of affordability to this new funding source for development.
All right, thank you for the question. So this district has no land use authority. You already control that. If you want affordable housing, then that's, as it goes through the process, the approval process, that's where you would do it. This is a financing tool. Remember, you've approved the zoning, you've approved the subdivision. This is just, are they going to go to bank A or are they going to go to this? And this is not public financing. This is private sector financing. Okay. I mean, they're creating a district so they can be considered a governmental service district, but it's all private money. It's not public money that's going in there. And so I've asked, how do we do this? After you've done the land use authority approval and you've done the subdivision approval, how do we go and say we want affordable housing? And again, this is only for the infrastructure piece. It's not for the larger piece of building the structure. How this could address affordability is if we get more homes built, get more infrastructure, we get more homes, more inventory in the market, that will provide competition. That's what this is intended to do.
Okay, well, Representative Dunleavy, thank you. Appreciate taking the
All
time.
right, thank you for the opportunity.
So as of right now, thanks, Brandon, appreciate it. So as of right now, our suggestion is to have position pending on this one. There are still some discussions, and this is part of the wider discussion that we're having on all the housing pieces. So our staff suggestion is that we don't need to take position quite on this yet today, but we'll continue talking with that. So unless someone wants to take a different position, let us know when we get to the ratifying bills, but that is our suggestion on it as of right now. And with that, Molly, yep. You thought you were gonna, nah.
I know you've all missed this. All right. So as of, nope, that's not the bill. That's not my slide. There we go. As of right now, we have 3 homelessness bills that have been filed. One, staff recommends we support. The other 2, we recommend that we are in oppose as we negotiate. The first is HB 207, Homeless Council Amendments by Representative Jack. It allows a mayor or their designee to sit on the Utah Homelessness Council. Right now, there are 5 municipal mayors on the council, and if one of them is unable to attend, that city does not have a voice in that moment. They don't have anyone who can vote or speak during committee discussion. So this would just allow a mayor's designee to sit in for them. We recommend supporting this. The second is HB 298, Homeless Services Amendments by Representative Clancy. This takes a different approach with the Homelessness Council. It removes all of the mayors from the Utah Homelessness Council and replaces them with county commissioners from Davis, Salt Lake, Utah, Weber, and Washington. Additionally, in its current draft, it removes buffers and the land protection around all of the existing homeless shelters that the league negotiated into place to try to make sure that no community was oversaturated with a bunch of shelters. And it also makes some amendments to Code Blue. Representative Clancy, some of these changes were drafting errors that were not intentional. He is looking at revamping this bill and amending this bill. In the meantime, we recommend that we oppose it. The third bill is Homeless Revisions by Representative Abbott. It also removes all of the mayors from the Utah Homelessness Council and replaces them with county commissioners. It also reduces the local contributions to the mitigation fund back to 1.8% or $200,000 cap. As a reminder, last year, both the LPC and the League Board of Directors voted to support increasing the local contribution to that higher rate and higher cap. And so as such, we again are recommending that we oppose this bill as we continue to negotiate. Are there any questions on any of these bills? Great question. So we have heard some folks, from some folks that feel like cities are driving homelessness policy for the state. Also, as of right now, the only county voice on the council is Salt Lake County. And so there is a sentiment, based on my understanding, from our colleagues at the counties that they, as counties are getting more involved, they would also like to have a seat at the table. I would say our concern right now isn't necessarily that there is county, participation and representation, but that it should not come at the expense of cities. And so that's why we recommend for these final 2 that their oppose is currently written.
Sean Guzman, St. George City Attorney. The first bill is our bill, and we do ask you to support that. The other agencies that sit on the council right now, in statute, it allows them to have a designee, but it doesn't allow the mayors to do that. And some of us, even though we have large cities like St. George, have part-time mayors that can't always make the meetings. So this is a good bill, and I appreciate the support on that. But Mayor, going to your question on the county commission, that there's a feeling that the counties aren't participating enough. But to replace those mayors who have these shelters in our cities that are bearing the burdens with it, that willingly took these on, some didn't willingly do, but some of us did, but still have them in our cities, and replace them with county commissioners who don't face the same problems we do, that don't answer to the constituents that we answer to, that don't care about our neighborhoods or work with our police officers that are out there working with these camps, working with the homeless shelters to make sure our cities are still livable, makes absolutely no sense in order to get county participation. I can tell you this, our county has given us our shelter $50,000 in the 10 plus years that we've operated that shelter. Well, the city of St. George has put well over $1 million, probably $2 million into not just this shelter, but also housing as well. So it makes absolutely no sense. If we want county participation, there are other ways. And when they mean participation, they mean money, dollars. There are other ways to go about doing this. So I say we absolutely oppose 298 and 314 because of those provisions alone. Thank you.
And on 314, I also want to remind folks that last year when we discussed changes to the mitigation fund, that was largely because we also knew that we had additional cities becoming shelter cities. So since last session, both Sandy and Tooele have opened up qualifying shelters and will be eligible as recipients for the fund, which is excellent, but it also means that those dollars needs to stretch further. So again, staff recommendation, support 207 as written and oppose 298 and 314 as currently written.
Perfect. Thank you, Molly. Carson's going to bring back the last two set of questions. We've got 20 minutes because at 1:30, as we've mentioned before. Okay, we got 20 minutes and a lot to do.
I was just going to say, I'm with Provo City Deputy Mayor. We didn't seek out any of these bills, but I do see a lot of merit. This is the homeless group is setting statewide policy, saying this is what Utah County will need to do. This is what the elected officials in Utah County would do. I see a lot of value. We've heard from Wayne Niederhauser that this is really, the homeless issues are something that the counties need to lead out on. Counties have health departments, cities don't. And so I see the merit of what each of those representatives are trying to do to get more county involvement on these statewide issues and what's going to happen in the various counties instead of the model is. It may not be the right direction, but I see what they're trying to do, and I think there's value to it. And I think I personally would prefer us to go neutral on those while we study them out. I haven't even had a chance to read through the entire things. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, no, yeah. We need the mic for online, and I want to clarify that they're opposed as currently drafted. So it's not opposed to everything with every potential sub, it's just opposed as currently drafted.
Yeah, I think we have to oppose as currently drafted. I have no problem with involving counties more in this, but the state and everyone is asking cities to do more and more on this. And we are doing more and more on this, and to lose voice and control over that, I think would be heading in the wrong direction on this. So let's involve the counties, but not diminish the voice of cities.
Okay, perfect. Daryl, 18 minutes, right? Okay. We're going to finish the slide on the housing. I know we had to jump back and forth because of when Representative Dunnigan was able to come. Here, we won't have time to really discuss these Slido questions, but these are concepts that have come up in the last few days, and we just need your first blush thoughts on them, which again, we will share with the officers. And I want to emphasize the reason we're asking you these questions before they come into a bill is to get a sense of, are any of these ideas worth exploring? We'll discuss that with the league officers based on your feedback. We're opposed to the ward bill. There are going to be other bills like the ward bill coming up. We want your thoughts on these concepts before they show up in a bill, okay? So the first or the third question here is, let's say we went down the path of every city had to do a first home zone, and it was a percentage or something like that. Part of what we heard is that there needs to be some entity, state agency, AOG, somebody who reviews that first home zoning to determine whether the requirements are met. So if X% of your city had to be zoned for first homes, then an entity confirms that truly X% of your city has it. Okay. Okay, 17 minutes. We're totally gonna make this. Okay, I'm gonna leave the voting open for another 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3. And I will point out, we have DWS right now that already comply or checks compliance with moderate income housing plans and associations of government, or excuse me, not AOGs, the MPOs that check for station area plans. So we're in this space now as is. Okay, this is another uncomfortable one, but it's important to think through this one. So right now, if you Cameron City are not in compliance with moderate income housing plans, then you're ineligible for state transportation dollars. You're ineligible for the fifth, which was passed last year, modified last year. So you wouldn't get the city portion of the fifth, and you pay a fee to the Olene Walker Housing Fund. One of the ideas that has come up in recent days has been, if there's a city that truly is not doing their part to zone for first homes, that at that point, then a builder would be able to build on small lots so long as some are deed restricted. So you get that outcome, but it's only if you're not in compliance in some form or fashion. Yeah, so the question from Councilmember Bradshaw is how do you determine the city's not? That gets to the kind of the previous question too, like how do all these pieces fit together? So for now, for MIHP, it's DWS. Not saying it would be DWS, but kind of in the context that we know it's DWS. So if you're not in compliance, then this provision would kick in. And this is not a new provision. This provision exists in state law in quite a few states around the country. Okay, so this is nothing new. I was reading about a bunch of those state laws over the weekend to try to get an understanding of how they've been working on the ground. Let's go, Kyle. I'll leave the question open for another 20 seconds. Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle Laws with West Point City. We had a conversation with Speaker Schultz, who expressed to us their desire to provide incentives, not sticks.
Yeah.
What can you say about that?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm down to 15 minutes. So what I can say about that is that Speaker Schultz he's been very outspoken in wanting to provide cities with tools to accommodate population growth, accommodate a variety of housing types. So we've had several meetings with him and other stakeholders trying to figure out what those tools could look like. So unfortunately, there's nothing ready at this point in time for us to bring back to you of what it could look like, but he's been very collaborative in that way of saying, I don't like the idea of state mandates. I'd much prefer a more collaborative approach and provide communities with tools. We've heard from a lot of other legislators and state leaders who are frustrated by some cities around the state who they feel like aren't doing their part to plan for housing. So that's in large part where this type of provision comes from. So that's the tug of war between incentives and sticks, consequences. But I do want to thank West Point City Mayor Vinson. Kyle and I chatted about this before, but I know that West Point met with Speaker Schultz and Helpers recently met with Speaker Schultz. I joined them for that meeting last week. And we appreciate those of you who've been meeting with legislators, which leads to our final Slido question here. We want to report back to the officers. Have you talked to your legislators about how your city is proactively planning for housing and infrastructure? And if the answer is either not yet or uncertain, let us know and we will connect you so you can have these conversations about what's happening on the ground in your community. Likewise, if you answer yes, find us afterwards, shoot us a text or an email and say, this is how the conversation went, so that we have a better sense across the legislature about where folks are at. Because while there's a lot of pressure to do something big, there's also a lot of recognition that cities have been trying to plan for housing, and we've done a lot of big things in recent years. So there's that recognition. And I had a senator say to me the other day, the legislature doesn't want to run over cities. We want to work with cities, but we want to do hard things. And we need to figure out if there's a path forward to do that. Okay, that's final line on housing. I'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. And then Carson, I'll let you switch it back so we can rapid fire. We've got 12 minutes And we've got two public safety, the two other bills, and the chance for you to bring forward other bills. Thank you for your advocacy and involvement in the league. Carson, I'll turn it over to you and Justin.
All right, so I'll even make this a little bit quicker. We're not going to talk about HB 84 today. That's Representative Wilcox's school safety amendments bill. There's still a lot of moving pieces there, so we will address that in another meeting. I really want to hit on HB 251. This is about the fourth iteration of this bill now. We've seen it every year for the past few years. This bill is a little bit different. There's been a heavy fiscal impact on municipalities the last few years. This bill is designed so that the employee, if the employee decides to enter this early reemployment phase after 60 or 90 days, depending on if they're public safety or not, then they will take a pension cut. Again, the rate depends on whether they're public safety or not. And they will not get cost of living adjustments for that period while they're reemployed. Additionally, if you are an employer who chooses to hire one of these employees, you'll have a fee and the employee will pay a fee through that process as well. So what does that mean? That means that according to URS, that cost, the unfunded liability, is offset. So unlike past year's legislation, this bill will not have a fiscal impact on public safety employers. Because the fiscal impact has been our primary concern, and we even got to neutral last year, we as league staff are recommending a position of neutral, recognizing there's still a lot of work going on. But our primary concern has been addressed. So we recommend a position neutral. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this in more depth, but if you have any questions, please feel free to grab me. I'm happy to talk about it more. I also want to mention that there's more details. LELC, my understanding is they took a position on hold, so we'll continue to work with our chiefs of police and our public safety leaders as we navigate this policy. Are there any very quick questions about that? Fantastic. One other bill I wanted to just briefly mention, Senate Bill 34, Utah Retirement System Revisions. This specifies that URS participating employees who fail to keep records of employee service are liable for the cost of employee reduced pension benefits. Basically, if you keep poor records or if you don't record that and the employee loses out on retirement benefits, whether it's the years accrued, you'd be responsible for that. We're recommending a position of neutral, as our understanding is that's pretty consistent with, or the record keeping wouldn't be a problem. But if you have concerns about that position, again, please come grab me afterwards. And then lastly, for me, the public safety recruitment and retention survey results are complete on our website. You can scan this and we'll send out a link for you to see it later. This includes 3 years of survey results from our public safety employees, police, fire, sheriffs, everybody. So yeah, some more information there to help guide this policy. All right, and then with 9 minutes left, I will turn it over to Justin.
9 minutes is a ton of time. All right, I want to talk about SB 28. So this is Scenic Byway Program amendments. To understand what's going on with this bill, one, the Scenic Byway Program is up for sunset this year. So if they don't pass something, it just disappears completely. So I want to make sure everyone understands that one piece. But it restructures the Scenic Byway Committee to what's up on the board there. So someone appointed by the Office of Tourism, UDOT, counties within the proposed Scenic Byway, someone appointed by the ULCT, by us, and then someone appointed by the outdoor advertising industry. So if someone wanted a Scenic Byway, they would make an application to the Office of Tourism. The Office of Tourism would then structure a committee specifically for that one that would be made up of those members. And then they would make a recommendation to the legislature who would ultimately vote on that. So we just really want to take a quick question on this one. Take your temperature. Don't have a Slido for it, sorry. But are there concerns about this structure or questions about it? Not snarky comments. We don't have time for that right now, although I do appreciate them. But just questions or concerns. We're trying to figure out just how we prioritize this one and if it's something we need to engage on. So opening it for just a second. Yeah.
Amy Shumway, Farmington City Council. I'm currently the rep for the league on that committee. I like that they're restructuring it to be more local. However, outdoor advertising industry, do you want billboards?
Right.
So I would say, reading through it, I think we should support it, striking line 233 in the bill.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other thoughts? Oh, in the back here, Isaac.
Yeah, a lot of comments from our city council and others in our community, really concerned about the billboard industry being on there and concerned that this would really open the door to ruining Provo Canyons as a scenic byway and other things. So anyway, lots of concern I'm hearing.
Okay, any other thoughts? So we're not taking a position right now, but Councilmember Shumway said, yeah, kind of support if we could strike that. Just kind of a temperature. I'm sorry, people online was getting a little bit in the room. You can give me comments in there and we can look at them. Is that the general direction people feel like we ought to go without taking an official position on this one right now? Raise your hand. Give me a raise your hand if you kind of like that general direction. Okay, that's good enough on that one. Thank you, because we're flying through and I promised we would be done on time. We'll talk about that other one later. That's all right. Okay, so that is the bills. Are there other pieces of legislation that, now again, with the qualifier that I gave at the first, it's that we are tracking a lot of pieces of legislation. And there's a lot of pieces of legislation that are still being drafted, being substituted, being worked on. But are there any pieces of legislation that you want to bring up today that you either a vote's coming up soon or you've heard something about? Have 1 or 2 minutes if anyone has questions. Yeah, right over here. Liam will run the mic over.
One of the things that's been proposed is taking away residential plan review from cities. We've heard that's been talked about and possibly coming up. That would be a bad thing. And I would hate to see us support something like that. And hopefully we can get ahead of that before it heads out.
Okay, so did you hear that one, Cam?
It's not there yet. The discussion's coming. I don't know when, but it seems like those sneak up pretty fast when they come.
About getting rid of residential plan review.
Eliminating residential plan review. And the reason I say that is because there's an association called the Utah Association of Building Officials. They understand there have been a couple of problems in certain cities. They would like the opportunity to try to contact those cities and head this off before it becomes a bill.
Perfect. No, thank you for bringing that up. And for better or for worse, those types of things do sneak up on us, but they usually don't actually catch us off guard because we find them and we meet with the building officials. They have a regular 7:30 a.m. meeting. We meet with them to make sure we're shoulder to shoulder. So thank you for that. Other pieces? Oh, I can answer that. Yeah, I can do that one. Mayor Shepherd asked about House Bill 256. Are there any other bills people want questions on? Liam can take the mic. You take the mic, I'll do 250. The House Bill 256, this is the Sentinel bill. It's being substituted as we speak with language we negotiated this morning that clarifies that if you are near that applicable military land, you consider the compatibility study, but the Department of Defense does not, or the Department of Veteran Affairs does not have veto authority over the land use planning. So that'll be in committee this afternoon. We got that language. I approved it about 20 minutes ago. Yeah.
And it's out there public now.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all. We got to get out of this room pretty quick, but I need
Just make an update next week on HB 261.
261? Yeah, we can do an update.
All right, we'll be here same time next week, but we need a motion to ratify the league's position on the bill tracker as has been explained to you. Got a motion to ratify. Is there a second? Got a second? All in favor of ratifying the league's position on the bills as the bill tracker set forth, say aye. Any opposed? That sounds unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn. All in favor? All right, we stand adjourned.
Thank you. Everyone, please take your garbage out of the room if you can. Throw it away. Appreciate that.